All right. We just sang hymn number 134, I think it was. Jesus paid it all. How many of you, when you sing that song and you get to verse 2, imagine a big cat with spots, because it says it's changing the leopard, doesn't it? It says leper. Leper, right? You ever had that, like as a kid when we sang that song? I always thought it was saying leopard. You know, that song is talking about the leper. Leper was one that is, their body is disease. It's decaying and dying from the inside out, and is often by open, unhealing wounds on the outside of their body. And so when it talks about who can, it says, "Our Lord, now indeed I find thy power, and thine alone can change the leper's spots and melt the heart of stone." One and the only one that can take that unhealing wound and heal it, right? Well, thankful to know that Jesus Christ paid for our sins, and that we can have redemption, forgiveness, and eternal life through the work of the Lord Jesus Christ. It's phrases like that and others that talk about the great gulf, right, that didn't span at Calvary. That idea of something that we couldn't possibly achieve, we couldn't overcome. There's one that came that did, and thankful to know that he died for us. All right, we are going to be back in the book of Psalms. Now, we've been going through the book of Psalms chapter by chapter, and where possible, because many of these are written by David, and so where possible, we've been trying to go back and read in 1 Samuel or 2 Samuel or different places where we can see some of the things that he was writing about. And I just think that for me it's really helped to draw even more out of those passages when you realize this was a real thing. This was something David actually went through, or when you see the full story and the things he was up against, man, the Lord's deliverance was amazing. And that's often what David wrote about. Now, Psalms chapter 60 is maybe a little less detailed in regards to the history that we can go back and read from. And even when we do, there is some question that you have to kind of work yourself through a little bit to know exactly, is this what it's talking about? Is it this place or that place? Or is it even a place that's mentioned? And there's a lot of debate on it. So we're gonna hit that briefly, but we probably won't spend as much time there as we normally do, because sometimes when you do that, you got multiple chapters of stuff that you're trying to read, and there's a lot of detail. We don't have as much detail, I think, personally, in regards to where this one comes from. But what I'd like to do is we'll go ahead and read Psalms chapter 60. We'll talk a little bit about the superscription that's above it, and we'll go to 2 Samuel, and we'll talk a little bit about where this is and some of how you reconcile some of what may appear to be some differences. And then we'll come back and we'll go verse by verse through Psalms chapter 60 and just see what we can glean from it. Okay, so let's start with a reading of the chapter. I'm going to go ahead and read the superscription too, and I'm just going to warn you ahead of time. There's some really long names in here, and I'm going to butcher them horribly. But just know that I know that when I'm doing it. But there we are. The superscription above it says, "To the chief musician upon Shu-shanadoth, Mitcham of David, to teach, when he strove with Aram Naharaim and Aram Zobah, when Joab returned and smote of Edom, in the valley of Salt, 12,000. And then verse 1 says, "O God, thou hast cast us off, thou hast scattered us, thou hast been displeased, O turn thyself to us again. Thou hast made the earth to tremble, thou hast broken it, heal the breaches thereof, for it shaketh. Thou hast showed thy people hard things, Thou hast made us to drink the wine of astonishment. Thou hast given a banner to them that fear thee, that it may be displayed because of the truth. Selah. That thy beloved may be delivered. Save with thy right hand and hear me. God hath spoken in his holiness. I will rejoice. I will divide Shechem and met out the valley of Succoth. Gilead is mine and Manasseh is mine. Ephraim also is the strength of mine head. Judah is my lawgiver. Moab is my washpot. Over Edom will I cast out my shoe. Philistia, triumph thou because of me. Who will bring me into the strong city? Who will lead me into Edom? Wilt not thou, O God, which hast cast us off, and thou, O God, which didst not go out with our armies? Give us help from trouble, for vain is the help of man. Through God we shall do valiantly, for he it is that shall tread down our enemies. This is an interesting chapter because it starts off, the first few verses kind of start off talking about how bad it is, but then by the time you hit verse 4, it starts to talk about coming together under the banner of the one that's going to protect and deliver them. And then it talks about some of God's promises in the middle of the different places that are promised to come together and to be a kingdom. And you could even argue to some degree, and some do, that there's maybe even some future reference in some of those places. And then it talks about how the enemies of God are going to be overcome. And then it ends with this idea of where our help truly comes from, right? One thing that I love about the Psalms, and especially the ones written by David, even in his great accomplishments, he always recognizes where his strength came from. He always gives God the glory for the victory. And as we've went through these, right, some of these, when we've read them, we've went back, we've seen, sometimes it's obviously a miraculous deliverance from Saul, right? But sometimes we've seen things where David has just had this great victory over his enemies. And I mean, he showed himself to be a great general. He showed himself to be this great strategist and this great warrior. And he had a great victory, right? And you'd think that that'd be the time where we'd really lift David up, or we'd lift up the nation of Israel as this amazing entity. But David will talk about how it's God that protected. It's God that delivered. It's God that gave us the victory. He even at one point, if you remember, even basically said that it was God that taught him how to do what he does, right? He recognized that it was through God that he was able to accomplish anything. And you do see that here in this chapter, and I love that it ends with that reminder that, listen, your help doesn't come from anywhere but God. God may use people. He often does. God may use people, but you got to recognize it's not that. It's God, right? It's God, and we're thankful to know that. Now let's tackle a little bit of the superscription, because as we try to tie this back to where it might possibly be referring to, or what it may be written about, this superscription talks about this being, of course, of David, and that it was meant to teach. But it talks about a time when he strove with Aram Naharaim and Aram Zobah, and then Joab returning and smiting of Edom in the valley of Salt, 12,000. Now, as you try to go back through and you try to find where some of this story is, the closest resemblance that you can find to this is in 2 Samuel. If you would, turn over to 2 Samuel chapter 8. Now, I am going to read the whole chapter, although I think much of what's in the chapter may not be directly related to this. But you have to understand that chapter 8 is dealing with the victories of David, right? As he has come in, he's become king. There's been some uniting, and David starts to really have great victory. As a matter of fact, some of the times it describes here are probably some of the best political and geographical victories that the nation of Israel has had, and honestly, it only got, it's like almost this is some of the height of where they were, right? It had never been this good, and it may not ever be. I can't say it won't ever be that good, but historically has maybe not been that good since. And you see here the great victories that David has, and starting in verse 1. It says, "And after this it came to pass that David smote the Philistines and subdued them. And David took Methgammah out of the hand of the Philistines. And he smote Moab, and he measured them with a line, casting them down to the ground. Even with 2 lines measured he to put to death, and with 1 full line to keep alive. And so the Moabites became David's servants and brought gifts. And David smote also Hadaezer, the son of Rehob, the king of Zobah, as he went to recover his border at the river Euphrates. And David took from him 1,000 chariots and 700 horsemen and 20,000 footmen. And David hewed all the chariots, horses, but reserved of them for 100 chariots. And when the Syrians of Damascus came to succor Hadaezer, king of Zobah, David slew of the Syrians 22,000 men. Then David put garrisons in Seir of Damascus, and the Syrians became servants to David and brought gifts. And the Lord preserved David whithersoever he went. And David took the shields of gold that were in the servants of Hadaezer and brought them to Jerusalem. And from Beta and from Bethriah, cities of Hadaezer, King David took exceeding much brass. And Toi, king of Hamath, heard that David had smitten all the host of Hadaezer. Then Toi sent Joram, his son, unto King David to salute him and to bless him, because he had fought against Hadaezer and smitten him. For Hadaezer had wars with Toi, and Joram brought with him vessels of silver and vessels of gold and vessels of brass, which also King David did dedicate unto the Lord, with silver and gold that he had dedicated of all nations which he subdued, of Syria and of Moab and of the children of Ammon and of the Philistines and of Amalek and of the spoil of Hadaezer, son of Rehob, king of Zobah. And David gat him a name when he returned from smiting of the Syrians in the valley of Salt, being 18,000 men. And he put garrisons in Edom. Throughout all Edom put he garrisons, and all they of Edom became David's servants, and the Lord preserved David whithersoever he went. And David reigned over all Israel, and David executed judgment and justice unto all his people." Now, the rest of the verse just go on and talk about different people that are in leadership and different positions under David. But as you read through this, you see a lot of victories. You see victory over the Philistines. You see victory over the Moabites. You see victory over the Syrians from Zobah. You see victory over Syrians from some other places. You see victory over the Edomites. You see some union or some confederation with some other nations. David in one place here is almost, he's the enemy of this other guy's enemy, and I see your strength and how you can conquer these guys. Man, I want to be your buddy, right? And so you see some of that. David and the nation of Israel are having great victories, and they're not just repelling people, but they are actually continuing to subdue and to conquer, right? Because there's a difference. Oftentimes, in some of the times before this, you would see battles, and listen, they'd go to fight against the Philistines, or they'd go to fight against these people. But oftentimes, these were times where, they were defending themselves against people trying to take more and more and more of their stuff. Well, here you see that they've not only repelled people, but they're actually starting to go on the offensive a little bit. And David is setting up garrisons within the other nations around them, and there's starting to be some tribute paid and some things along those lines. And you really start to see the nation of Israel start to expand. And when you see some of this, you might look at this and go, well, I don't know why we're reading 2 Samuel chapter 8. I didn't see any mention of anybody named Amram Naharam or Amram Zobah. But what you did see was you saw some Syrians from a place called Zobah. And when you look up the words of this in the superscription, this Aram is really an indication of, that is an indication of that they are from Syria and different parts of that kingdom. So think about it, Syrians following Zobah, or Syrians from Zobah. and Syrians from Naharaim. You might also say, well, wait a second. It talks about those two guys, but then it talks about in the valley of that he smote of Edom in the valley of Salt. Again, I think you got to look at a couple of things pretty close. It says, when Joab returned and smote of Edom in the valley of the Salt. So there's lots of different theories, lots of different explanations, and I don't have time to get into all the different ideas. But sometimes when you see things like this, on the surface there may seem to be conflicts, but oftentimes it's just because you're not thinking about the different scenarios, right? So if you read a lot of the ancient Jewish rabbis and stuff like this, what you'll find is that they often taught and believed that yes, there was this battle that we're talking about here in 2 Samuel chapter 8. There was this battle with the Syrians from a couple different places, but that they were in confederation with the Edomites, and that as they had a battle, and it says in one place that there were like 22,000 Syrians that David had defeated, that as they were returning from that, they ran across the Edomites who were coming to help the Syrians, and there was yet another battle where even more were defeated. And there's two or three different versions of that, whether it was all in one place or they fought in one place and they were returning, and along the way they ran across them. In the end, I don't know that I care too much which way that was. All I'm saying is that don't be so quick to say, oh, there's a conflict, oh, there's an issue here. There are perfectly valid explanations that would fit into what this is, right? So don't let people tell you that there's mistakes or that there's problems or challenges or that the text is wrong. How many times do we hear our own history, and yet it really depends on who's recounting it and which part of the battle they're recounting as to how things happened, right? The other thing that you'll see here is that it was David in 2 Samuel chapter 8. It talks about that it was David that got the glory for this battle in the Valley of the Salt, right? And David got his name when he returned from smiting of the Syrians in the Valley of the Salt, being 18,000. Again, you understand that David oftentimes is in these battles, but Joab and Joab's brother are his two generals, and they are the ones that are going out and oftentimes leading the different branches of this army to actually do the work. So there's just a lot of different pieces in here, and I wouldn't get too hung up on it. It also talks about in First Chronicles, I think it's First Chronicles, I'd have to go look that up. First Chronicles, I think chapter 18, it says, moreover, this is First Chronicles chapter 18, verse 12, moreover, Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, slew of the Edomites in the valley of the Salt 18,000. And so the question that people ask is, well, did David do it or did Abishai do it? Well, remember, David's the king leading the army. Abishai is the general. And I say, well, did Abishai do it or did Joab do it? Well, it's interesting. You actually have some places where you see how these two brothers worked whenever they were in their battles, right? I think Brother Philip just went through one not too long ago. Joab says, okay, you go over here and you fight these guys. I'm going to go on this front and I'm going to fight these guys. And whoever gets done first, like, come over and help the other one, right? That you see a couple places where they kind of do that. We're going to divide and conquer. You go fight on this front. I'm going to go fight on this front. So a lot of the ancient Jewish writers, when they read about this stuff, they talk about that David was the head guy. He was the chief. So all the victories would have been attributed to him. Joab and his brother would have been generals fighting against this. And as they return from the slaughter of the Syrians and they meet the Edomites in the Valley of the Salt, they have two branches, and one go off and fight here and one fights over here. And then when it's all said and done, right, Joab may have had his 12,000 that he took out, and Abishai had his 6,000 that he took out, and the combination of those two victories is 18,000 Edomites in the Valley of the Salt, right? And so It's just interesting when you look at some of this. The temptation by this world is to look and say, the Bible doesn't even know how to put its history together right. But you look at this, it was often the case that these different Moabs and Assyrians and Syrians and Edomites, they would create a joint agreement with each other, and they would come fight for each other, right? Brother Philip just went through the one where, was it the children of Ammon called for the Syrians, right, to come up and fight with them. And so I'm not worried about, personally, this idea of, well, one place says 18,000, one says 12,000. Was it the Syrians or the Edomites? I think it was both. When you look at these different ways that these people came together and fought together against the nation of Israel, and you see the different leaders of the armies and how they handled things, I don't have any issue at all whatsoever harmonizing those different passages. But in the end, what I don't want you to do is get too wrapped up in all of that, right? What happened? Man, the nation of Israel, this in terms of the nations around it, this small nation, this nation that's often divided, this nation that for a long time didn't even have a king. I mean, they were ruled by judges, and the one king they had, he's out now, and you got the new king in there, and all this stuff, right? And oftentimes they've been conquered and then delivered, and conquered and delivered, and conquered and delivered, of their own making, by the way. But a nation that has really been under the thumb of a lot of the nations around it, right? But now you're seeing great victory. You're coming from a place of constant fighting and just trying to defend yourself against the nations around you, to now you're at a place where not only have you ousted them, but you've expanded your borders, and you are now really in a good place, and the Lord is blessing. Right? That's what I see when I read 2 Samuel chapter 8, great victory that the Lord has provided. And so when you go back and you think about Psalms chapter 60, and you think about it in that context, he starts off in verse 1, "O God, thou hast cast us off, thou hast scattered us, thou hast been displeased, O turn thyself to us again." There were times in the nation of Israel where they had been overthrown, they had been conquered, and it was usually because they had sinned. It was things in their life that weren't right, and they were falling away and starting to serve other gods and all these other things, right? And what would happen in those times, especially you look at the Judges, man, when you go through the Judges, it was just a mess, right? And listen, a lot of the stuff that Saul was dealing with the enemies of the nation of Israel, and even some of that stuff had carried over into the time of David. Now, a lot of that stuff was because of their history and where they were and what they'd done and the conquerings that they had to go through because of their own sin. He says, "O God, thou hast cast us off, thou hast scattered us, thou hast been displeased. O turn thyself to us again. Thou hast made the earth to tremble, thou hast broken it. Heal the breaches thereof, for it shaketh. Thou hast showed thy people hard things. Thou hast made us to drink the wine of astonishment." Man, we have seen some hard times. We've seen some rough things. But Lord, you have shown yourself to us, and you have reminded us who you are. And we have just walked away from some of this astonished at what you've done. You see a guy who understands their history, and he understands the sufferings and the things that they've went through, and yet to see now that they're on a mountaintop, and they have been reminded of who the God is that they serve and what he's capable of. And in verse 4, "Thou hast given a banner to them that fear thee, that it may be displayed because of the truth." Selah. David here, I think, is rejoicing in the fact that the Lord is really showing himself through the nation of Israel, and they're having victory after victory, and they really are reminded of who they serve. And he says, "You've put us under your banner." We are here under the banner of God. How neat is that when you think about this? Who was the king? Well, David. Man, and he had some mighty generals and some mighty men. And they were having victories that just a few years ago wouldn't have seemed possible. And what does David say? David doesn't say, the nation of Israel is following under my banner. They're following the banner of David. No. He says, Lord, you have put us under your banner. You've put us under your banner. And I really do, honestly, when you read the writings of David, I don't think he just said that. I think David believed that, right? When David saw victories for the nation of Israel, what David saw was God's glory being reflected to the world around them. This is God showing he is with this people, and we're here serving under the banner of God. He always gave God the glory. In verse 5, he says, that thy beloved may be delivered, save with thy right hand, and hear me. David often, as he was going through different things in his life, as he was going through battle, he would talk about this idea of the Lord hearing me. He would call out to God, and he would say, Lord, hear me. David knew where his salvation came from. David knew where his strength came from. David knew where deliverance was going to come from. And not only that, but David knew who his victories came from. And in the middle of whatever battles were going on, and listen, they were having some great success in 2 Samuel chapter 8. But they were battles, right? Listen, you don't kill 18,000 men and 22,000 men without a lot of fighting and turmoil and strife and effort. And I have no idea the things they saw and went through in the middle of all of that. But in the middle of those battles, even though they were being victorious, David is crying out to the Lord, Lord, hear me. Hear my plea, hear my cry, hear me and deliver us. We sometimes think about only praying things like that when we're losing, right? When we're losing. David here is saying, hey, we have gathered under the banner of God, and we are having great victory. Lord, hear me. Lord, deliver me. That prayer of continued asking for help. It says in verse 6 and 7, this is dealing again with kind of showing the promise of God and the way that God would help. So, it was verse 5. That thy beloved may be delivered, save with thy right hand and hear me. God hath spoken in his holiness. I will rejoice. I will divide Shechem and met out the valley of Succoth. Gilead is mine, and Manasseh is mine, and Ephraim also is the strength of mine head. Judah is my lawgiver. You see here this idea, when you go back and you look at Joshua and some of the things, and God had said, listen, I'm going to send you into the promised land, and I need you to divide it out. I need you to met it out. I need you to, you're going to take this, and you're going to take these guys, and you're going to take these guys, and you're going to have victory, and I want you to divide this out by this tribe, and this tribe, and this tribe. That was the promise of God. That was God saying, you will be victorious, and here's your inheritance. And I think to some degree, amongst other things, the psalmist here is drawing back to that promise of God that, listen, this is your land and you will be victorious here. And I'm going to divide this out and I'm going to conquer for you. I'm going to take over those guys. I'm going to take over those guys. And this will be your inheritance. And then I will say this in verse 7. It talks about Judah being the lawgiver. It's actually pretty interesting because when you look at that, I'm just going to read these verses to you real quick. In Genesis chapter 49, verse 10, it says, "The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh come, and unto him shall be the gathering of the people be." Judah is my lawgiver. In that simple statement, there is actually a hearkening back to a promise that was given, a blessing that was given, right? And it's not just that Judah would be the lawgiver and that the scepter would be there, but until Shiloh come, right? And so it's just neat to me, because you know who else is considered the lawgiver of Judah? Yeah, Jesus Christ. And so the psalmist here is actually hearkening back to something else. It's just neat to me, and I don't really plan on getting into all of that, but when you look at Psalms and you look back and you see now that there's this blessing and this promise that's being fulfilled, and he's looking back on those promises of God, but there's also a looking ahead of the promises of God, because he knows that the original blessing was that the lawgiver would not depart from Judah until Shiloh come. And just kind of neat to think about some of that. I'm gonna have to be careful, because I'm trying not to get too wrapped up in that. But it's just neat. Take a look at that sometime when you get an opportunity. That idea of Judah is my lawgiver. If you get a second, go back and take a look at some of that. Verse 8. I've told you before that the Bible is amazingly descriptive in its language, right? It does a really good job of drawing pictures in our mind. We in this day and age, we are used to just plopping down on the couch and hitting play, and we get the whole visual story like played out in front of us on the TV, right? For most of history, that's not the case. And the Bible does this amazing job of really just drawing this great picture in our mind. And I want you to think about this. It says, Moab is my washpot. Moab is my washpot. The nation of Moab was an enemy of the nation of Israel. And the psalmist here describes the conquering of Moab by God as them just simply being like a washpot to him. And if you imagine a washpot, like just take this big bowl, fill it with some water, and you're going to scrub it, and you're going to turn it over, and you just dump it out, right? I mean, it's just so descriptive of it. And what did we read in 2 Samuel chapter 8? What was one of the nations that the Lord had given victory? It was Moab, right? And David describes it as God using them as a washpot. They were just wetted down, scrubbed down, and dumped over. Cleaned out. Over Edom will I cast out my shoe. Man, Edom. Who was another nation in 2 Samuel chapter 8 that had victory? It says that Edom, that David came in, and he not only defeated them, but he actually made inroads into their territory and set up garrisons within them, and they began to pay him gifts. And he says, Edom will I cast out, over Edom will I cast out my shoe. And Philistia, triumph thou because of me. Oh, what about Philistia, man? Triumph of Israel over Philistia because of who? God, right? Who was another nation that was mentioned in 2 Samuel chapter 8. Well, it started at the very beginning of the chapter talking about the victories that they had over the Philistines. In verse 9, he says, who will bring me into the strong city, and who will lead me into Edom? Who will lead me into Edom? It is interesting. I don't know all the timing of exactly when this psalm was written. I think we have an idea based on the superscription of the time frame that it's talking about. It is highly possible that David has had victory over the Philistines, that David has victory over Moab, that David has fought against the Syrians, and in fighting against the Syrians has had this battle with the Edomites. And who knows, it's possible this song was written between the end of that battle and when David actually went into Edom and set up garrisons. It could have happened afterwards. I don't know. But what did happen? Well, David went into the area of the Edomites and he took over their cities. But David's question for us is, who will bring him into those strong cities? This is one of those questions that, to some degree, it's a rhetorical question, right? I mean, I think you know by the context who the answer to that question is. It's God, right? David knows that. Who's going to give him victory over the Edomites? Who's going to allow the nation of Israel to be able to go into the strong cities of Edom and be able to conquer them? God. Wilt not thou, O God, which had cast us off, and thou, O God, which didst not go out with our enemies? You know, there were times when the nation of Israel went out, but they didn't have God with them. I'm thinking of a few in my mind. There's a few times where they went out with great confidence. Man, they even took the Ark of the Covenant with them. Man, we got it. But God wasn't with them. He had cast them off. He had said, listen, you guys are off in sin and not doing what you want. And you're doing some things that I'm going to remove my protecting hand for a little bit. And you see these people that, it's like the guy that you've seen the stories or the movies, like the guy's got the big guy behind him, right? He's the big guy that's going to protect him. And when he's got that guy back there, man, they're loud and they're bold and they're willing to go everywhere. But then they make a mistake and they step out thinking that person's behind them and they're not. It's kind of like that, right? Man, there were times they went out in full confidence, but he wasn't there. And David here is saying, who is it that's with us in these victories? Who is it that's let us have these victories over Moab and Philistia and over the Edomites? Who is it that's going to let us go into the strong cities? Well, God hasn't cast us off. God is with us. There were times where he wasn't because of what we'd done and who we were, but we know that this battle, this victory is ours because he's with us, because he is there. And he says in verse 11, when we come down to these verses that we talked about at the very beginning, give us help from trouble. Give us help from trouble. That is a short, sweet, simple prayer. Give us help from trouble. You know, there's times when that's probably all we get. That's all we can get out. That's all we got. Lord, give us help in trouble. I don't know, again, whether this psalm was written at the end of the battle, in between battles, before the battle. I don't know. But it's written in a way that you see that there's been victory, but maybe not all the victory has come to be yet. And the psalmist is saying, but what's left? I know who will get us there. I know who will get us there. Listen, in your own life, you may have had things where you've been through so far, you've gotten so far into it, and you've seen God deliver. It was hard. It was rough. You didn't know how you're going to get through it, but God delivered. But it may not be done. But take courage and take strength in knowing the one that got you this far, he can get you all the way. Because it's that God that's going to get him into the strong city and that's going to get him into Edom. And as he goes out through this, he says, give us help from trouble. For vain is the help of man. Vain is the help of man. David realized and knew listen, it doesn't matter how many people I have on my side. It doesn't matter how many valiant men I've got. None of it is worth anything if God isn't on our side. Right? There's other places that talk about, listen, it's our strength and our courage shouldn't be in horses of war and weapons of war. It should be in God. Right? He says, give us help from trouble, for vain is the help of man. In verse 12, through God we shall do valiantly, for he it is that shall tread down our enemies. David may say, for vain is the help of man, but he realizes that him and his armies and the things they need to do, they're going to have to go out and they're going to have to do this. They're going to have to fight these battles. But he says, we will do valiantly, not because I'm this great strategist, I'm this great general. I've picked the best men I can find. And he may have done those things. But he says, we will fight valiantly because God is with us. He gives God the glory. We shall do, through God, we shall do valiantly. For he it is that shall tread down our enemies. I know, whether this was written in the middle of some of these battles or whether this was written after all those battles were already done, David looked ahead at the things in front of him and said, any victory I get, any enemy that's overcome, it's going to be because God did it. Right? Honestly, with some of the verbiage here, and we have honestly no way of knowing this, but with some of the verbiage here, this is really much written in the context of we've made it so far, but yet there's still more to come. It is written in that language. Because he said, through God we shall do valiantly, for he it is that shall tread down the enemies. Don't know it? It's possible he wrote this before all those battles were over. But he said, I know where my victory's coming from. I know who's going to overcome. David did not look at and look back to the things that happened in 2 Samuel chapter 8 and think about all of the victories that he had. He didn't think about all the enemies he had overcome. He looked back and thought of all of the enemies God had overcome. And listen, in our life, we need to be thinking about and thankful for the things that God has already delivered us from. And we need to be looking ahead and trusting in Him helping and delivering us from those things. And making sure that we are living our life in a way that is relying on Him, trusting in Him, thanking Him, giving Him the glory. Because listen, it's the times when we stop trusting in Him, we stop giving Him the glory, we start trying to do it our own way, that what happens? Hey, we start to lose those battles. Happened to the nation of Israel all the time. Are you trusting in Him? Are you leaning in Him? Are you thanking Him, glorifying Him? And don't forget, going to Him and pleading your cause. That's what we need to be doing. And I think it's just interesting to read this chapter in light of all of the great victories that were going on in 2 Samuel chapter 8. And yet David didn't claim any of that glory. He laid all of that at the feet of God, like we should. All right? Brother Philip, would you come and lead us in a song, please?